Legally Speaking. Here are today's hosts.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Legal Issues of the Day with attorney Nathaniel Lee. Today, I got my superstar attorney Milton, who is a generational talent and attorney. He represented Rodney King and led the evolution of videotaping of police misconduct, which led to successful litigation all across the country. But before we get started, we start on a sad note. A close friend of mine, Judge Morris Overstreet, died recently. His funeral was today down in Houston, Texas. Judge Overstreet was the first African-American elected to Texas Supreme Court Criminal Appeals. He was a historical figure, and he did great things in the law because Texas at the time was like #1 in the world in terms of execution for the death penalty. And he fought hard for many persons to get fair trials because, part of the process is that a lot of these death penalty cases, the defendant was later determined to be innocent and didn't get a fair shot at trial. Also, we had a former employee, Sherry Beck, passed terrible car accident. We just condolences to her families and her friends. Now, Milton, as you know, this week, also for our audience, our call-in phone number is 833-653-3529, 833-653-3529. For the benefit of the folks in terms of the most current legal issue, it was delivered by President Joe Biden on Thursday night on the State of the Union. And let me give you a quick summary before we get started of the things that was highlighted that I think that you need to be aware of. During the Biden administration over the last 3 years, he created a record of 15 million new jobs. That's the highest amount of new jobs created in American history. Unemployment rate reached a 50-year low. 16 million small business applications filed. There was 800,000 new manufacturing jobs created. More people have health insurance than any time in American history. The racial wealth gap between African American and whites narrowed to the lowest level it's been in 20 years. And one of the flagship victories was the $1.2 trillion infrastructure package, and that increased investment in highways, bridges, airport, public transportation, internet, waterways, and energy. In fact, all the construction you see on the interstate highway, you could think the President Biden administration. And then one of the more significant things that most people forgot about, under the Biden administration, there was a COVID relief deal where each of you received $1,400 in unemployment benefits were extended to all people that was unemployed, additional $300 per week. And there's rental money given to your state and cities to, if you couldn't afford your rent during the pandemic, which lasted for 2 years. There was money to feed the children in school from K to 12. Now, in the legal aspect, Biden did something that's unprecedented in American history. He's appointed more than 40 federal judges, but here's the key. 80% of the new federal judges are women and 53% are people of color. So we've had more people of color upon the federal bench than any time in American history. Unemployment rate is the lowest it's been in 50 years, 3.9%. When Biden took office, it was up to about 6.5%. So people were marveling over the Trump administration, but they forget how bad it ended. Unemployment rate was off the roof. People were dying every day. And then President Trump thought that you could cure COVID with bleach. And then for the young folks out there, what did the president do for you? Well, you got student debt cancellation. 153,000 of you students' debts have been canceled. Now, wow, that's a lot, but I want to make sure that you know that because I discovered that only 33 million people watch that. For the folks that listen to our station, just pass it on. But Milton, before I get started, let's talk about LA. LA, you have a contention, a lot of election out there, but the one that's relevant to today is the prosecutor's race. Tell us about that race and why it's such a big deal.
Well, the Gascon, who is our present district attorney, came into office with a lot of progressive new ideas about prosecution. And he prohibited his deputies from prosecuting young men, especially young minority men, based upon gang affiliation, prior convictions, those enhancements that would add life sentences to a sentence that otherwise wouldn't be life, would add many more years to your sentence, ultimately giving young men no future once they go to prison. And he thought that that was barbarian and draconian, and he forbid his deputies from doing so, which caused a split in the district attorney's office. You have some line deputies, L-I-N-E, deputies opposing him, opposing his rules, going against the policy of the district attorney's office. It was almost chaotic, but he withstood all of that heat and stood in there and fought his own deputies on how they were handling cases, because he was trying to change the order of things and they were refusing to do it. So he kept it from being totally chaotic. He bent a little to try to appease some of those deputies, but still many of them use it, and those who have political aspirations use his programs to argue that he's too liberal on crime, he's soft on crime. But I think his programs are progressive and more humanitarian than the programs to the right that wants to incarcerate and lock people up and charge them with the highest crime that they can be charged with.
Well, Council, that's becoming a theme now in all these elections. Like here locally, we got Jefferson Street, who tried to buy the mayor's race, now is purchasing a seat in Congress. And I think that they give the most distorted view of immigrants. They call immigrants migrants instead of immigrants. And then they accuse them of being criminal, not realizing that criminality of immigrants are probably about 10% of the typical Americans. But the second thing that bothers me is that they're running on the idea that the border problem is caused by the Biden administration, not realizing. Let me explain to everyone something very basic. My sister was the chief purchasing officer for ICE, so border protection, and they bought all their weapons and supplies. And I visited her office one day, and it was an educational experience for me, because then I saw what they were doing, and I thought, I had no idea they spent billions of dollars on everything, from drones to weapons, pistols, you name it. Well, here's the problem. In order to control the border, you have to have staff to man the border, like you have to have people that protect you. So you have to have agents on the front line to monitor it. And then you have to have a court system with judges and lawyers. So our country is a country of immigrants. So people come to this country and there's an immigration process. The problem with our border right now is that if a person comes into the country illegally, it takes 8 to 10 years before there's a court hearing. In order to fix the problem, the Biden administration, the Senate, sent a nonpartisan bill to the House to fund border protection. Now, it's very important. So the issue that the Republicans are running on this year, saying that we're letting people into the country, they prevented the solution. That is the money to hire an agent to protect citizens in the border, and the money to fund the court system. Court system requires judges, lawyers, and staff in order to prosecute people that enter illegally, or to legitimately admit people who qualify. So that's the problem. So now we got a local person running for Congress, Jefferson Freed, saying, well, liberals are soft on crime and they're letting everybody in the country, which is such a distorted view. It's insulting. And you're playing racial stereotypes and somehow saying that these immigrants are a bunch of criminals. They're not. There are criminals in every group of societies, whether lawyers, doctors, citizens, firemen, policemen, doesn't matter. But there are a lower percentage of criminals than the typical American. So I want everybody to realize that when these politicians are talking this stuff about the migrants instead of immigrants, what they're saying is just false. And keep that in mind. So you fix the problem by having the staff necessary to protect the border and also to resolve the convoluted process now that we have whereby you can't adjudicate the cases and see whether or not they have a legitimate reason being in the country. Remember, African Americans came here as slaves, but the other folks that came here, they're immigrants. That's right. So the people in this country, except Native, they're immigrants. And because of that, we need to make sure that we have the process legally done so that we can continue the process. But anyway, Milton,
But that
in your
false
city, go ahead, I'm sorry.
You know, Nate, we don't have a thermometer hanging outside on the street corner showing, I mean, a thermometer tells you the temperature. We don't have any thermometer for that false narrative that you're speaking of when politicians speak and others speak for what they want, and they lie and they tell a lie on top of the lie. And that's been going on for centuries throughout, American history. So we're still facing the same thing, the false narrative. This country was created on a false narrative of the founding fathers telling the public that Native Americans and Black slaves especially were going to kill off all the pilgrims and they were going to kill off the plantation owners and that they were a danger. And in order to bring this union together, it was a false narrative publicized in the paper intentionally. So that practice of creating a false narrative and perpetuating a false narrative for political gain is hundreds of years of history, and it hasn't changed. That's it. I mean, we can complain all day, but that's the game plan. That's how they get what they want. And we got to be a more educated society, man. That's fine.
One of the other issues that is really bothering me that wakes me up at night now, Milton, has to do with this unprecedented attack on affirmative action. Mm-hmm. It's been in the news and out of the news and down behind closed doors. But when I attended the University of Georgia Law School, Milton, and shortly before I attended it, the law school was segregated. It had a long history of segregation, and that they didn't admit any African Americans, and that's very important. And so, but before they were desegregated, the University of Georgia Law School did have an affirmative action program. The affirmative action program admitted people who were white and wealthy or had political influence. So they always had affirmative action. It's just that it was never directed toward people of color.
Right.
And so I think most people don't realize that that's kind of the way things was done. And so we had affirmative action, and my class had 7 African Americans. They're all successful because when we got there, it was tough. The University of Georgia Law School, one of the top 20 law schools in the country. But the reality of it is that they used the affirmative action model that they used before to recruit and retain top qualified African Americans. And they did that by giving us full scholarships. And then after I graduated from the law school, I headed up the scholarship fund. And I raised a record amount of money. And so every student at the law school, white, Black, Hispanic, or otherwise, they had a full scholarship. It raised just that much money. during my tenure on the board, law school board. And I say that to say that a lot of these doors that was opened up during our lifetime, Milton, are suddenly being closed again. And
Yeah.
it's very sad.
It's more than very sad. It's going to harm our society because it's just common sense, Nate, that we all have to benefit from the advantages that this democracy give. And it's not just set up for a certain mindset of people, and that is white majority, that this has to be shared amongst everybody in this country. And diversity and equality serves the better public good. And to me, I anytime I look at this issue or discrimination or racism, it just baffles me that people won't accept that the more we share the wealth of this country and open doors to everybody is best for everybody. It's a simple observation. So, but people use hatred and bigotry and racism to their advantage to get what they want, and they I guess don't care about the world public good. You know, I know I'm speaking in generalities, but that's just how I look at things.
Well, let me ask you a question. I watched in great interest the LA district attorney race, which you, of course, got to be familiar with because it's going to affect you and your clients. And I watched how the candidates are masquerading, pretending to be that they're trying to protect the typical person, and they're using what appears to me to be racial tropes in order to run for office. Mm-hmm. Now, watching in your race, your local prosecutor has said that, in effect, that equal justice for all, which I think is a good idea. And right. That's his mantra. So equal justice for all meaning treating African Americans the same as Caucasian or Hispanic right. the same as Blacks or Asian otherwise. Right. And that makes sense to me.
Right.
But how do they characterize in your race their, you know, because we're going to see this nationally. They're taking these legal issues and they're exploiting them to somehow use racial stereotypes to run for office.
It's the same fear-mongering bull that has been there since who was the brother that they showed that the president had been lenient on and that he'd committed a crime after he was pardoned or the sentence was reduced. That was just one incident. That didn't portray the majority of the population of people who have been wrongfully sentenced. But that's just that's the way this thing is run, man. We have here in California the Racial Justice Act, which is a law that was passed a couple of years ago that allows for the attorney to demand the research of your charges and sentences. A person commit a crime, let's say any crime, and we found out, and prosecutors across the country have agreed that Black folks are charged more severely than whites, or Latinos are charged more severely than whites. They've done studies and investigations in Colorado and across the country, and the prosecutors agree. They've been racist in the application of charging individuals. They've been racist in sentencing or making recommendations for sentencing in the courts. And it ends up with more Black people are in prison for cases or charges and convictions that white people receive less time for. So we got a long ways to go because racism is still very, very involved in our criminal justice system and in our legal system, period.
Milton, I took a really hard look back the early part of my career back in the 80s. And there was a few cases that probably changed the course of my law practice. Back in the early 80s as a young lawyer, I was doing a case for a young man that was involved in a severe accident. I mean, he had a really bad accident. and he owned a truck. And because of the accident, he was hospitalized. And because he was hospitalized, he had a couple payments come due that he didn't pay. And so the people want to repossess his truck. But his truck was stored in his garage while he was disabled and not able to drive it. And so they go to the local prosecutor and charge him with theft. Now, when he's better, he makes his payment. Eventually, we paid the truck off because the truck was damaged in the accident and it wasn't drivable anyway. And so when we get a settlement, we pay it off. But meanwhile, they had charged him with a felony, right? And so he had a public defender, because I did the personal injury case, not the criminal case. And I said, look, take your title to court, a certified copy of title, and any prosecutor that sees this would know that they can possibly prosecute you for stealing your own truck, because your title was a clear title, and the people that filed charges, name's not even on the title as a lien. I said, so this is a no-brainer. So he goes to court. About 2 hours later, he called him up panicking. What's up? He said, Miss Lee, my public defender and the prosecutor, he gave me a deal. I got to plead guilty in order to not get 2 years in jail. I said, what? So the prosecutor, even after they presented the evidence, would not dismiss the charges. I said, hell with that. So I stopped what I was doing, ran over to court, and I gave him the riot, and they dropped the charges, right? But right there, it told
how
me
many other young defendants was faced with a similar situation did that 2 years?
A lot.
Okay.
That's the point I'm making. So right. He only had a caring lawyer, and I didn't get paid for doing the criminal case, and I quit doing the criminal cases. But then in that case, I'd make an exception. Otherwise, this young man go to jail for not committing a crime.
2 years. Mm-hmm.
So my point of that is that I saw the justice system up close, and what stunk about it is that people who don't have the financial means, even today, probably don't get equal justice.
That's right. That's right. That's what the Major Justice Act is about. There was a young lady, I just recently finished a book on the run, written by a young lady named Alice Grossman. She spent 6 years in this community in Philadelphia studying this very issue and how criminality is grown really out of this community. You got a young kid sitting there, 9 years old, on the steps, looking out at the street, and the police pull up, and as soon as the police pull up, young men scatter. They run because they know that if somebody's holding a gun or some drugs and they drop it, if they don't run, then they're going to be stuck with possession of that gun or drug, whether they had it or not. So you're taught to run from the police. Oh, you ran from the police. You're evading the police. Now you got a charge of evading the police. You don't have any illegal contraband on you, but you're running because you're taught to run, because your older brother said, run, and everybody runs. For what? Because you know that you're going to be caught holding the bag. So that's just one of the first steps to criminalizing a society, a group of people. And these young men, they run because they may think they have a traffic ticket, or there's a warrant out for them for some petty stuff that they don't want to get arrested and go to jail for. So it creates this criminally oriented or thinking society that we start thinking that I got to run. I'm a criminal. I'm going to be locked up or arrested for something I didn't do, so I'm running. And so it starts this separate society that we see, and it helps criminalize this community group just from that basis right there, Nate. You follow me? People are taught that they got to run. They can't be in contact with the police because they're going to jail. They're going to get arrested. You understand? So if you don't make a deal to snitch or to talk, you're going to get a charge. And it starts from something just that simple.
Well, then the other part about that, unfortunately, like in our city, we had 18 African Americans shot by a police officer within 4 months here in the city. And at least half of those were unarmed, right? They were murdered by a police officer. And the irony is, a couple of them had come close to committing a crime. One of the guy was shot in the back, because they're fearful of police officer and they're running to try to save their life. They're scared.
Right.
And I understand that.
And many of these young people, Nate, it goes into, you get beat up or you get hurt. You don't go to the hospital because police officers are there in the emergency room and they're checking IDs and stuff. So then you're going to get arrested because you may have a traffic warrant or warrant for not appearing in court. So now you develop another professional society because you can't go to the hospital. So people who work in the hospital, they get employed or hired by the family to please come and help my son. They got a bullet in him. He got a broken leg. They got to treat him in the basement of the house or something and let him recuperate in there rather than going to the hospital. So now these people are getting a little side job. They get paid, $100, $200, $500, depends upon the degree of the operation and the surgery and the treatment on how much it may cost. So you got this situation, and you got the some of the guards and the people in the legal system who are charging money so that this person can have a telephone. They're making money off of these inmates, $500, $1,000 for phones. Or their female partners have to give up a little sex to the guard to make sure that this guy gets some weed or some dope. So it's got a society that's benefiting from this thing that's been created, this criminal mentality that's been created. And it just goes through a society. And you got that subculture in most major cities.
Well, what I've seen firsthand that bothers me about this process, Milton, is this. Like we had a case that went to the Supreme Court that dealt with death by cop. When you were talking about people run, so in my case, I have a suspect who was a suspect of committing a misdemeanor for not paying for a $19 watch that he didn't steal. It was handed to the guard, and the guard gave chase because he had stepped outside of the store. Well, the problem is, once he surrendered, he became a medical emergency because the guards had put the handcuff on him and he couldn't breathe. So he dies by positional asphyxiation, which means that the handcuffs were too tight and he couldn't breathe. And the problem that I had is that even when he surrendered and needed medical care, here in Indianapolis, the police officer would not allow him to go to the hospital to be treated. And you know what happened? The police officer got away with it under this theory of qualified immunity. Even though he caused the death or contributed to the death of this teenager, he got away with it. It's shameful, but that's one another problem we see. So even when the suspect surrenders, you see some elements of mistreatment. Even with the mistreatment, sometimes they get away with it because of this qualified immunity.
I got a couple of cases dealing with profile stops. Michael Moore, the police chief of LA, who recently resigned a couple of weeks ago, he implemented a policy saying his officers had to stop profiling young minority men. And I got a case where the police is driving down the street and you see on his body cam, he stops his car after crossing an intersection and he backs up and make a left turn to go down the street because he saw a young African-American man with a woman 4 o'clock in the afternoon walking across the street. And he stopped this person. The young man had a gun on him. But the law says you're not the law, Michael Moore's policy says you have to stopping profiling these young men because the majority of the time that you stop them, they're going to try to run or escape because they don't know what's going to happen. Or the majority of the time, these young men don't have any contraband or anything on them, but some difficulty may occur, arguments may occur, people get killed for no reason. For no reason, for a disagreement or an argument with an officer, then you you get charged with that, resisting arrest, because just like it, I don't want to be stopped by the police and questioned as to where am I going, what am I doing, where did I come from? None of your business. But they do it like with freedom. You understand? And yeah, people get upset and angry about it because they know that they are being mistreated and they're being picked out because of the color of their skin. So him creating a policy to stop doing that doesn't mean that that's going into full effect. Officers are still doing it.
What do you suggest is a remedy? Like here in Indy, for example,
changing the police qualifications, maybe paying more money to better officers, but you can't teach the old dog new tricks. And we keep talking about it, but we're not going to what is required, and that is getting more educated officers and better training and more pay. I'm sorry to cut you off like that.
Well, that's a good point. And one of the things that I thought that, like locally, that I think was an impediment, and I want all the citizens should request this. What led to the successful prosecution of police officers for police misconduct back in the 90s? They quit doing because we use that effectively to show the police officer committed murder or manslaughter. That is that after if a police officer caused the death of a suspect, within 1 hour, take a videotape statement of the police officer and go over everything in detail, step by step. And when you should do that, when you do look at the crime scene, the photograph, ballistic results, autopsy result, you could, in every case, I was able to show that the police officers committed murder or manslaughter in every case. As a result of that, the police department in Milton, they stopped videotape officers, and what they do now, if a police officer in our city, Indianapolis, kills a suspect, the first thing that he does is talk to the lawyer. They don't take their statement.
Right.
And then in one case, they shot this guy over 100 times, 51 times in the back. The police officer gave a statement to 9 months later. 9 months. And so they get away with that. And so a lot of times our local community leaders, they get upset. But what they have to do is go back to the basics. I think in our city, we have to go back to videotaping of officers after a police shooting. That's important because you can't do it after they have an opportunity to look at the evidence, recreate in their mind what occurred. It's not just a matter of body cams, because what we see in the body cams now, sometimes they're not turned on, or
Right.
they don't give a clear depiction of what is occurring in real time.
Right.
The point I'm making is that I think that all our listeners, that's one of the things that we have to demand, that we go back to videotaping these, because I see so many of these shootings, I'm sick of them, every day. Milton, there was a story, a tourist got killed, I think, in Jamaica, right? And they were saying, well, it's unsafe to go to Jamaica. I say, what? I say, so a single person got killed in Jamaica. Every day in my city, somebody gets shot and killed, every day. We have more shooting in any American top 12 cities than you do in that country in the whole freaking year.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking the most unsafe place now because of lack of gun control. I was in Jamaica and I discovered that in their country, Milton, in terms of this crime wave, is that you can't get a gun. It's almost impossible to get a gun.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go through a detailed process, screening, and then you have to do training. And I mean, the whole detailed process, because when I was there, I discovered that nobody carried a gun. security guard, no guns.
Mm-hmm.
And so the net result is, so the point I'm making is that we have to do something to stem the tide of violence, but at the same token, I think the police misconduct is still just as relevant today as it was when you started representing Rodney King.
George Floyd was only 4 years ago, and that was almost 30 years after Rodney King. So yes, it's important. It's important.
You know, the thing about George Floyd, it heightened awareness, I think, of almost everyone in the country of the perils of police misconduct.
Right.
I submit that that's one of the few times in American history that they got it right. But there was something unusual about that case, Milton, the George Floyd case, speaking of that. I've never seen a case where so many people videotape the crime.
Right.
I mean, we had the body cam, but the ordinary citizens did something remarkable. There was clear video of, 8 videotapes or so of what was occurring in real time.
Right.
And not just the police body cam, but the citizen videotape I thought was damning. And so that's one of the other things that we have to do, is that we have to make sure that the right to videotape police officers doing arrests be preserved. And there are states now that, in our state, I know there was some talk, I got to see what the final legislation said. They're trying to prevent people from videotaping what is clear police misconduct.
You know, this has gone on up the ladder. I believe this past week I read that paramedic, was it in Colorado or one of the other states, was convicted for using a drug on a suspect, a young man just walking home listening to his earphones, and didn't react fast enough for the police. He ends up dead. You know the case I'm talking about? Yeah, and ends up dead. And the paramedics did not go through the proper procedure to determine what type of drug to give him or what to do with him when they arrived. Was negligent in caring for him, and this young man died because the paramedics come on the scene and the police still control how they treat people and whether or not they can give them treatment and order them to stay back for whatever various reasons they want to use. If it's a Black or brown suspect, they let them bleed to death, or they let them struggle with trying to live if they are handcuffed and can't breathe. So now the law is finding that paramedics have a certain amount of responsibility to care for suspects in a more careful manner. It's just so many places where there's racism in our legal system is just not fairly applied. So many places.
Okay, now moving forward, one of the biggest cases in America that's going on is the Donald Trump trial indictment down in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yes,
in
sir.
that case, the former president was recorded attempting to have them fine, what was 11,000 or 12, whatever it was. He said, find these votes, and he's recorded. They were pressuring the Georgia officials to try to locate votes that suddenly appeared out of nowhere. And so he got indicted by grand jury process. And so then it turns out that Terrence Bradley, an attorney who represented Nathan Wade is the special prosecutor that Fannie was one of 3 that she hired to prosecute the multiple defendants in the massive trial that they had planned. And somehow they were trying to have her disqualified because she had a romantic relationship with Wade. And they're trying to say that the reason that she's prosecuting Donald Trump is to make money through Wade, despite the fact that Willis has a greater wealth than Wade, you know, and I'm thinking to myself, and so the judge set this for lengthy evidentiary hearing, and I was thinking to myself, this is a little bit ludicrous. Nowhere in America would you see, in a typical case, a judge allow this type of attack on the prosecutor. You know, and somehow you can equate him being paid over 2.5 years, 600,000, whereas the Trump lawyers were paid over $1 million in 9 months. And so the point I was making is that we find out that this evidence, this idea, looked like it emanated from Terrence Bradley, who was Wade's divorce attorney. Milton, this got to be one of the most egregious acts of misconduct I've seen by a lawyer. You know, talking about his clients. It's just incredible to me.
So what, do you know the outcome of this hearing yet? Which way it's going?
I didn't get a chance to watch a lot of it, you know, like most people, you know, during the daytime, I watch TV and watch bits and pieces, and then I read part of the transcript. And I was interested to see how a lawyer, because since 1800, lawyers cannot give information about their clients that relevant to the attorney-client relationship. The confidence and secrets of clients are protected even after their death. The only exception, of course, is that if it involves a future crime, the public safety would allow disclosure, but past crime, you can't. Every lawyer knows that. We all take the same oath. And somehow, this lawyer was sending text messages to a female defense attorney on the Trump team. One of the defendant charge. And I just thought that was bizarre to me that this lawyer would do something so ridiculously stupid.
So the motivation for this was for this lawyer to gain some advantage for his client in a divorce case? This is how this came about? This is what you're saying?
No, not really. The lawyer, Terrence
Bradley?
Yeah, this lawyer, he actually, well, first of all, Nathan Wade is the special prosecutor, and Nathan Wade was involved in a divorce at the time that's been going on for a long time.
Right.
Nathan Wade's lawyer is Bradley.
Right.
Terrence Bradley was Wade's lawyer, and divorce has gotten finalized eventually after a long time. So divorce didn't start in 2023. It started before that, but it just dragged on for whatever reason. But Terrence Bradley also practiced law with Nathan Wade. And then somehow, Bradley, it came out during the testimony, Bradley was communicating with one of the defense attorneys
For Trump.
and he supplied them all types of information through text messages. And then when he got on the court, a lot of people didn't understand that. He sensationalized the relationship looked like in the text messages, but when he got on the stand, he disavowed that information, saying I had no personal knowledge when the relationship started. They were trying to say that Fannie Willis and Nathan Wade romantic relationship started before she hired him as a special prosecutor. But the way I see it though, the judge should have shut this down at the beginning based on this simple fact. What the hell did them having a sexual relation have to do with the Trump team trying to steal the election? I'm thinking it's not relevant. It's not even realistic. Fannie Willis is a multimillionaire, and somehow she could financially benefit of this guy getting his paid.
You're saying that the court should have shut this down with something like a summary judgment, that this issue shouldn't even go forward with any hearing because it's not warranted, it's not based on any type of legal harm, but that they're pursuing, they can't prove the legal harm that they're trying to prove. So the judge should have shut it down. Is that what you're saying?
Well, what happened is that when the allegations are made, it's very simple. you make allegation and then you need to have proof of the allegation.
Yeah, offer of
So
proof.
when they made the allegation, he then say, you can do discovery, we have witness testify. So they did it backwards. So they
Right.
made an allegation per salacious without proof.
Right.
And so this raid has gone on for a couple months, and there's no evidence that connects the charges against Donald Trump and the other defendants
Right.
and the
Right.
relationship between, in other words, it's ludicrous. The
Yeah.
whole idea is so far-fetched until the judge should have said, okay, how do you connect a romantic relationship to the
With
evidence
this-
presented to the grand jury?
Right.
He
Right.
was
Right.
indicted by a grand jury. Are you saying that somehow the grand jury, if they had known about the relationship, wouldn't have indicted him? In other words, yeah, go ahead.
I remember I represented a federal judge here in LA once who told me, when I told him, man, I really like going to federal court because I feel that I get a fair deal from the judges because they're not affected by society as much as state judges or the county. He said, Mr. Grimes, how do you think I got on the bench? I said, well, the president appointed you judge to this district court. He said, how do you think I got appointed? I said, well, you got appointed. He said, well, I paid $15,000 to the campaign of the president, like everybody else that got here. And I seek higher office, theoretically, like going to the circuit, to the district court, then being elevated to the appellate court, and maybe one day sitting on the Supreme Court. And so we are motivated by what's happening out in society. We don't sit here totally uninvolved with society. So we want to know what's popular, what the public demand, and then that's how we decide the law to apply. So they're not immune. And then you have a state judge here. He's going to be influenced by his surroundings, by whether or not a prosecutor is going to pick him to run against, or a public defender or another attorney, because they can find that he didn't accuse him of not doing his job in a particular situation. And so judges lose that power that we think they sometimes have, Nate, because they still are influenced, and many of them are influenced and have to think about their job security, as simple as that may sound. You follow me? And so maybe this judge had some concern that if I nip this in the bud and say, no, this is bull, and throw it out, I'm going to have people out there unhappy with that, and they're going to come at my position. I got to provide for my family like everybody else that's employed.
Very good point. Okay, Mr. Owens, you have a question coming for legal issue today, sir.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Mr. Owens, you have a question coming for us today, sir.
Yes, I was the one that talked to you yesterday about the entertainment contract case.
Yes, sir. I know who you are. Go ahead.
Okay. I don't have a little time. I'm sitting outside Barnes United Methodist to sing for a funeral, but I'm outside so I can go right in when I get off the phone. The case that I called you about was I had a contract with the Tommy's Reunion Choir for a concert on October the 1st in 2022. Now, I had to postpone the concert just prior to the concert, but I'd paid the Tommy's, the main headliner, their total honorarium. And there's a clause in the contract that says when the sponsor cancels 60 days before the concert that they're due 50% of the honorarium. Well, I paid the full amount, so I felt that I was due 50% back. I had a demand letter sent by Legal Shield attorney officers of Ocone Hintermeister, appealed to his humanitarian instinct, and he refused and felt that he wasn't that I wasn't doing anything back. So I'm trying to pursue it further.
Well, I make it real simple. Indiana allows long-arm jurisdiction for people who are affected. So you can sue those folks in your local small claims court, sir, because Indiana does allow you to sue people out of state who refuse to give your money back for damages done in the state. So you sue them your local small claims court and sue them next week and get them served and then move forward. And then you get a judgment against them, then you attach their bank account, okay? And you need to turn your radio off because your radio is repeating it. That makes sense?
I'm trying to, I'll say, go ahead. I did turn it down. I had a feedback. I'm sorry.
I was saying real quickly, because I had to move on, is that you can file suit in the local court, small claims court. Indiana allows long-arm jurisdiction. So in other words, our state law allows you to exercise jurisdiction over an out-of-state defendant. And this is because the harm was caused in-state. You lose your money, you're paying your money to the vendor who didn't give it back to you. So you file suit here, even though they're out of state, in Indianapolis Small Claims Court. You just do that,
right.
Get them served, and then once you get a judgment against them, you can then attach their bank account. Okay?
When I talked to Lawrence Township Small Claims Court, they were in a quandary.
Wait, sir. I don't care what they say. I'm telling you, this is all you need to do. See,
right, but they weren't sure whether I should file it here in Indiana or in Chicago. That's my problem.
Okay, for the third time, that's very important. Indiana allows jurisdiction over out-of-state defendants. That means that you can, now, for the third time, file suit in your local small claims court. Because the harm to you is caused in Indianapolis. So you get to file suit here on our long-arm statute. So you just file suit, you get served the process. There's a bunch of cases, I can cite you a bunch of cases that you could tell a court like that talks about this, but the court can't give you advice on this issue. But what I'm telling you is accurate, and so you do that next week. You'll file suit right away. Okay.
Okay. I can do that. I appreciate your help and your advice, and I'll be probably talking to you as this goes along.
Okay. Take care now. Bye bye now.
All right. Thank you very much.
Now, but in any event, back to this case in Georgia, you see the case of this local judge, Milton. He now has competition. The judge was appointed by the Republican governor, and he's up for re-election. And initially, he didn't have any competition, but as of, I think, last Friday, he has 2 people running against him. So it's a good probability that this judge will lose in the November election. I think the people in that county are watching the case very carefully. You've had a slew of people and grand jurors that says that there's evidence that the former president committed a crime when he attempted to influence the outcome of the Georgia election. Right. And because of that, I think that, and that's the thing about democracy, having the ability to hold elected official accountable. I think that's important. Now, one final thought process. There's a bunch of cases we could talk about Trump because he's got more cases than anybody else in the news. I mean, but your election in California, real quickly, about the DA office, how important it is for the Black community there in California that you keep that current prosecutor? What difference would it make?
Let me say this, though, Nate, please, about this judge. It's sad that he's sitting now in a position where he has to be, as a human being, concerned about how does his decision in this hearing, how is it going to affect his future? How is it going to affect him as a family man, I assume, as a man who has to support his family? If he doesn't make the decision that the majority wants him to make, and he makes his decision just based on the law and the facts, all of this now has to go into his decision making. You know, you say he's now got people competing against him. He's got two people running against him. Maybe our judges should have a 5-year term and that's it. You don't have to worry about running again, etc. But we got all these other influences on our legal system, on the decisions that are made. And that seems to be what is in front of him now. As to Black people here in LA and George Gascon or another district attorney, there is some light at the end of the tunnel with Gascon, you know, with people not being charged with enhancements and more severe sentencing. Without Gascon, we go back to the old way of lock them up, close the door, and that's it. That's the difference. That's the difference.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you for your comments today. I'd like to thank our audience for listening to us. Please join us next week for another show. We're going to talk about legal issues today. Thank you, everyone. May God bless and keep you until we talk once again. Take care, everybody. 95.1 FM.